Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 20 of Music is Not a Genre. We are doing another interview. This is interview number 41, and I'll introduce the guest in just a minute. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre, and you'll get a video for every episode of this podcast. Watchers, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre if you would rather just listen and not stare at us. And everyone, go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this show, my band Rec, and everything I do. And as always, like, subscribe, share, review, whatever it is that they all tell you to do. It really does help. So I would appreciate that. And I am also, now that I'm on a new distributor, this show is on a new distributor, I am looking for new sponsors. So if anyone out there would like to promote anything, my streaming numbers for some reason have gone way up since I signed with this new distributor. So it might be a good idea for you to promote or sell whatever it is you have. So send me a message and I will work with you on that. Let's get right to the guest. My guest today is Don Cusic. He is a writer, historian, professor, author of over 30 books. He has an upcoming book on the which will be the biography of Chet Atkins. And he's also written a musical on Minnie Pearl and teaches history of the recording industry at Belmont University. Don, how are you today?
I'm doing great. That was a wonderful intro, Nick.
All right. Thank you. Done it a few times. It's good. And, every now and then it comes out right. So I would imagine that most people who listen or watch this show do not know who you are. So can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I'm live in Nashville, Tennessee, teach at Belmont University, and then, of course, write books, write songs, write musicals, all of those things. And I'm glad to be on Nick's show. And have lived in Nashville since 1973, 72 or 73, which is longer than most of your listeners have been alive. And consequently have learned, and I've been in the music industry, so I've learned a lot about the history of Nashville and the history of the music industry, because people who are into music are into the history of the music, are into the past, and for the most part anyway. And they get excited and they love to talk about old music and old trends and old artists, or I'd say former artists and former songs, and all those things connected to the past.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's something I like to do a lot with on this show, which is anytime I go over, I cover a lot of topics, but anytime I go over, let's say, an artist or an overall body of work or genre of music, or really, or a type of format or technology, I do my best to go as far back in history as possible to find the true origins. For example, we think of, cassettes as, starting to bubble up in the 60s and became popular in the 70s and 80s, but they existed, since the 1930s or something like that. And other things, or, the prehistory of an artist and stuff like that. So you're talking to the right person when you're saying that you believe that people who love music really get into the history of it. It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, well, the music industry is the music, the business, and the technology all rolled together. Yeah. It ain't just music. So that cassette that you were talking about, that played an important role in linking the era of the record with the era of the CD, and gave the industry a big boost. And it was a different type of listening, because especially with the Walkman, you could listen by yourself and nobody else could hear you. And what we've seen is music increasingly is what you listen to alone, even if you're in a crowd. So it used to be, with radio or jukeboxes, you have a whole room full of people listening. That's not the case now. That era of listening as a group I don't want to say has disappeared, but it's certainly not the prevalent way we listen to music now. And that deals with technology.
Yeah, I talk every now and then about how we often overlook that technology influences the music itself in in
Mm-hmm.
ways we might not readily think of. So a new type of the speaker or microphone or recording device or listening device, but especially on the back end when it comes to things like, 2 tracks, 4 tracks, and and
Mm-hmm.
on up until however many you can fit on a computer processor, basically at this point. And that changes how an artist makes music too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, now, people don't write songs so much as they build songs, uh, particularly in pop, but it's in country too. It's in R&B. You start with a drum, or you start with a bass line, or you do a rhythm section. Even when you're writing, and of course with the technology, and the synthesizer has been the most, I don't want to say disruptive, but in terms of changing the way you hear music. And you can build a song on a synthesizer, and they do it here in Nashville. A group of people, songwriters, get together, and by the time they finish, they've actually got a master recording.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
The fact that you can use a synthesizer, or some people, I know some songs that have been made on iPads, for example, with GarageBand, that have ended up selling millions of copies and or streaming millions of times, or whatever the terminology is today. When I started creating music, cassette was the main thing, 4 track cassette recorder, and I got a synth and sequenced things on the synth, and half of my music was synth, and then some of it was guitar, and of course vocals and all of that. And I've seen it develop over the years to where I did home recordings like that, then would spend money to go to a studio, because the only way at that time to get something professional sounding was to do that. And now we're talking the
Mm-hmm.
90s and the early 2000s. And then I transitioned to recording at home, right where you
Mm-hmm.
see now. I'm staring at the computer where I've done most of my work for the last many, many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
And you get you can get broadcast quality music just sitting in your own home studio in a
Mm-hmm.
way that you never could, even 15, 20 years ago, would have been too expensive to do that. But now this technology is so affordable, and you see a glut of music coming from everywhere and in everyone, because you hardly have to spend anything to get it done.
Yeah. Well, of course, I remember when the synthesizer came along, because Robert Moog, he's got the first one. That's really in the '60s. But it's the end of the '70s, and you've got Christopher Cross, you've got uh, Madonna, you've really got Stevie Wonder uh,
Mm.
doing a lot on the synthesizer. And I remember hearing uh, that there was no reason to to have a guitar or a drum or a bass or a horn or a banjo, because it was all on the synthesizer.
Yeah.
And then there was a backlash from that. And I want a real guitar. I want a real mandolin. I want a real trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, which makes you wonder: is there going to be a backlash? Um, the South Korean stuff
Oh,
that's out there.
yeah.
That's very much manufactured. Pop music, on the pop side, very much manufactured. Country has still got a rhythm section a lot of times. But is there going to come a backlash and saying, we don't want this? We want a real mandolin again.
I love questions like that, because I often find that there are, let's just say, older people, and I'm including myself in this because
Mm-hmm.
I've been around, and that believe that when trends change, that what happened in the past
Mm-hmm.
isn't going to happen again, and that was the
Mm-hmm.
heyday, and that was the only time that'll ever happen. And what I found, following music and studying modern music and all of that, is that many things tend to return. They come in cycles. And so I
Yeah.
kind of agree with you that I'm even seeing now, it really gets me when I'm talking to another musician who's even younger than I am, who's saying, they don't make music like that anymore. And I'm like, well, if you're talking about the pop charts, okay, that's one thing. But I know for a fact there are bands in their teens and 20s who are charting and getting, write-ups in magazines and all of that stuff, who are making music just with bass, drums, guitar, maybe a synth, as a little color, but they're making organic music, let's say. So I kind of feel like in the next few years you're going to see a resurgence of that kind of instrumentation even in the pop charts.
And with AI coming along, and it's still a toy right now. People are still playing with it. I've seen it write a song. All of those kinds of things. We really don't know where it's going, but it could become as a backlash on that, because if any machine can write a song, what does that do for the self-worth of a songwriter? And so there might be a backlash. Well, there already is a backlash within the creative community. If you watch the Oscars, the big deal was we did this movie without AI. Oh, yeah. And so within the community, and I know down here in Nashville, in songwriting, that's a major topic. We'd like to write the songs ourselves.
Which I appreciate. I tend to write in two ways. One is I have lyrics already. I might work out some chords on a guitar or piano, and that's one thing. And then in another way, I'll do what you said, which is I will build a song in the studio. I'll find a beat that I like or a chord progression that I like within the recording system itself, and then build upon that. I might find a old lyric sheet that fits or something. I still very much appreciate the idea of crafting a song and paying attention to the precision of the lyrics and how they fit with the music and all of that, and trying to do something somewhat unique with it and everything. And I feel like a lot of that is still out there in different ways, but that there are people who are relying on or at least using AI in certain ways. Some might use it to generate, let's say, a loop or a sound, and then incorporate that into a song that they actually create. And others just throw it up and try to have a song fully. I had a bandmate of mine, one of the bands I'm in, sent a minor key version of "Here Comes the Sun," and I'm listening through, and I'm like, it's not seamless. You can still hear little artifacts that, that was clearly the AI manipulated that, but it was the original recording that AI somehow turned into a minor key. I didn't enjoy it, but I feel like there are people who are more attuned to being able to tell when something is AI. There's something lacking there or something you hear, but I wonder if the public in general is having a hard time making that distinction.
Well, I'll tell you who is making that distinction or broadcasting that distinction is the lawyers and copyright. And therein lies a real, if they've altered the song enough, is it copyright? And then, of course, the other problem is monetizing. That's a big word down here. How do we monetize this? Otherwise, you're just an amateur. Otherwise, you're just, playing in the basement. How do you get that song, as they say, out there? And of course, I've got students who are always saying, "Oh, I wrote a song last night, put it up on Spotify." Well, what's the marketing? Well, we're gonna people will hear it and it'll go viral. Well, that's not marketing. And so here you've got the business aspects of music coming in. How do you make money on what you're doing musically? Yeah. And of course, the big, well, it's a big secret. It's not a big secret. If you want to make money traveling, performing, have hits in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, because the current lineup is not doing that well. Other than the biggies, other than Taylor Swift and Drake and those kinds of guys. But
Yeah.
yeah, you have to have a good strong past to have a future.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I agree. I'm working with somebody, a couple of people now who are trying to do more to monetize my back catalog and my current music. And
Mm-hmm.
it is a job unto itself. It's something, related to, but separate from the actual creation of the music. And I
Mm-hmm.
belong to clubs and forums where other singer songwriters and creators talk about this and find that there's almost a reluctance to get into that part of the business.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it's lack of knowledge, but some of it is creatives have a hard time switching that part of their brain onto, okay, well, how do I market
Yeah.
this? And maybe they can't afford a team to help them do that, or even another single person. And I fully understand that. I've been there, most of my career, but that's so necessary. If you, like you said, if you want to be more than an amateur, uh, I see every year my income increasing to a degree from the music I make, but it's still nowhere near where I think it could be. And I have discussions with people who've been in the business for a really long time. My dad started in the business in the 50s, and he's been a recording artist and all of that. And we compared numbers. There was a song of mine that got uh over 1 million plays on iHeartRadio, and the
Mm-hmm.
sum total of what I made from that, a couple $100. And I asked him, how much would that have made if it had gotten 1 million spins on radio back in the day? And he couldn't really say. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Well, a million. Radio still makes more money than streaming.
Wow.
Uh, I mean, for songwriters, they're now. Of course, there's been a decline, and of course, young people, if you ask them, what they'll tell you is, I don't listen to the radio. I never listen to the
Yeah.
radio. But radio will bring in more money because they've got those collection agencies, the PROs. They got BMI and
Right.
ASCAP and CSAC,
Right.
collecting that money and passing it along.
Hmm.
Whereas the streaming, that money goes directly to the publisher or whoever owns the copyright,
Hmm.
which sometimes is the artist. But this is the strength of the major labels. They have a huge catalog. And so, I mean, watch TV at night and see how many oldies are with a product.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
bunch of them. And of course, at that point, the people who wrote the song are happy to have anything they could get. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
although the streaming, it's heaviest in the oldies. If you want to
Oh,
make money streaming, have a big 60s, 70s, 80s hit.
interesting. And yeah, you mentioned that when it came to performing too, and I can attest to that. I'm in four different bands. I have my band, another guy's original band, and then a kind of a hybrid band. But the only band out of the four that makes any money at all is the fourth band, and we are called Prefab Four. So you can imagine what music we're performing, and we
Yeah.
go in different iterations. We'll do strictly Beatles, then we'll do Beatles and Stones, then we'll do 70s, 80s, then we'll do 80s, 90s. But the point being, the biggest market for actually paying musicians to perform music is it's all oldies, which now is sort of creeping up, believe
Yeah.
it or not, just a little bit into the 2000s too, but most of it is 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah. If you're in Nashville, go down to Lower Broadway, because that's they block that off on Saturday nights and Friday nights too,
Ah,
and you go from bar to bar and they're playing oldies, primarily country, but
nice.
not always, because appealing to a wide variety of people. I tell my students, I said, look, if you want to make money playing music, do oldies, get an oldies band. And of course, they're going, the
Yeah.
worst thing in the world is do a cover record.
Yeah.
There's no respect in that. But actually, I encourage that, because if you look at the music of the '60s, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, a bunch started out as oldies band, as cover bands. The Beatles were a '50s cover band,
Yeah.
and the Rolling Stones were a blues cover band.
Yeah.
And so and what that teaches you is what a hit sounds like. you take apart that song, uh, learn this lick, because the deal is play it just like the record. Okay, that'll open up your abilities for your writing that this chord progression can go into a lot of different songs, or maybe a version of that particular lick can go into some songs. So I think being a cover band helps you. And if you get to the 60s music, one of the things that I pound on over and over again that the students look at me blankly, folk music has as much an influence on 60s rock as rock and roll.
Mm. Yep.
A lot of those guys came out of the folk movement. And again, that's cover bands that they were doing Kumbaya and We Shall Overcome and Puff the Magic Dragon.
Yeah.
And all that. But in fact, the Beatles are quoted as saying, George Harrison quoted saying, this is a great way to start because it's easy. It was 3 or 4 chords. You just strum it along. Easier to learn to play the guitar when you're playing that, as opposed to some song on pop radio now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that anyone who wants to create music, I will say almost anyone, is reluctant to want to go into the cover circuit or do a cover song in any way because there's quote unquote integrity involved with that. And my dad, although he had done a few originals, has spent the majority of his career doing cover songs of one form or another, and he impressed upon me the kind of the strength of doing that. But at the same time, as a young man, as a teen, I rebelled against that and said, no, I only want to do my music. And it took me quite a while to learn that lesson that learning other people's songs that were done well and successful is going to teach you a whole lot. And that you can be making money doing music that can help finance the career that you want to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should talk to my students. They don't listen to me. If it's a teacher, they don't listen to you,
Yeah. Yeah.
But why is the wisdom wasted on us old
I know, right? Yes.
You should have it with those young guys.
Damn it, right? Yeah. I wish he had known then. I tell you, based on the way just the conversation we're having, I feel like I would love to take your class.
You have to pass the exams.
Well, yeah. Been a while since I've done that one. Yeah.
I don't want to study.
Yeah, right. So can you describe what it is exactly you teach?
Well, yes. As I said, my foundation is that it's the music, the business, and the technology that creates the recording industry. Publishing is important, but I don't really dive into that. I, cover the formation of the PROs and a few things like that. But I start basically in 1877. Edison invents the phonograph. And then you got Valentiner inventing the graphophone, and you got Emil Berliner inventing the gramophone. And you got the move from cylinders to disc or plates, as they used to call them. So, and that's the technology. And in the business, they have to figure out how to make money. And so, the formation of ASCAP helps, and then, of course, BMI later. So that's on the business side, the fact that you have to build a machine to play the record and market it and figure out a way to get songs exposed so that people can hear them and like them and buy them. The sheet music business for a while, and then it becomes the record industry. And of course, the big break goes from when we are a sheet music industry to a record industry. And this is where you get, that the whites ripped off the blacks. Well, that's been happening for years. So you find a hit record and you cover it, and what it was is going from sheet music where you had standards. You had, this one song that everybody knew, maybe a different arrangement. But then the record comes along, and that's the definitive version of a song. So if you cover it, you've stolen somebody else's work. Not really, but that's kind of what the interpretation has been. And then, of course, the music, going from, the 1920s, just kind of getting started in the recording process. But that's the big band era, going into the 20s, 30s, into the 40s, how artists emerge out of the big bands. And why do you have big bands? It's because they don't have microphones, or they don't have the sound equipment that we got today. So you had to have a lot of members playing. And then why did big band end after World War II? Well, you take those guys on the road. We lost network radio pretty much. So you have, to take 40 guys on the road is a lot more expensive than taking 4 guys. And then, of course, when people teach a course like this, what they do is they say it's the history of rock and roll. And then you got a big argument. When did it start? Did it start with Bill Haley and the Comets, or did you start with this obscure record from 1938 that who's the guy that Big Joe Turner did? And all kinds of arguments. In terms of getting to the public, it was Bill Haley and then Elvis.
Right.
And so,
right.
But you love to get into the roots of a song there. That's All Right, Mama. Blues song comes a rock and roll song. So anyway, cover it up. Cover up to 2010. Stop with Justin Bieber.
Okay. Any particular reason you stopped there?
Yeah, the book was full. I'd written a book on it, and I had to. You've got to stop somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do an edit and rewrite on it, so I'll probably cover it up to 2020.
Nice.
If I can. But the problem is you have to have a stopping point for an historical perspective. Was or is Blackpink important in the history of the recording industry? You're not going to know that for 10 or 20 years down the line.
Yeah.
Is Drake going to last? Is Taylor Swift an enduring artist?
How do you know?
Yeah, you don't know until you've got a distance.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and it makes sense that 2010 there's enough of a distance there to kind of get a sense of who's hanging around.
Yeah. And Justin Bieber still is.
Still it. That's very true. Yeah. So what is this book that you're referring to?
It's called America and the American Recording Industry. And it's privately published because I didn't need to go through publishers and, have that wait a long time and edits and all that stuff. So I did it out, but I'm going to go with the publisher next time through. Yeah, so it's something I'd written off that course.
Right. That's fast. And you can get it where, on Amazon or
Amazon? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I want to make sure. Go ahead.
It's thick. It's too thick to read. Students look at it. It's like 1,200 pages. They look at it and go, can't do this.
Oh wow. Yeah.
I need to get it in a different format so that it looks smaller.
Right. That's funny.
It intimidates people.
Yeah, it's a lot. It sounds like almost like a reference book, like a encyclopedia in some ways. I'm going to look it up. I'm going to make sure there are links here too for people who want to read. And you have a you have a website where people can just find all of your books.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll make sure to have that too.
DonCusic.com. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Well, I'm getting the website redone. So.
Good.
Hopefully in a few days that'll be on the way.
Okay. Great. I think by the time this airs.
Amazon has that, the connections too, and I run a lot of stuff through there because I don't want to go be mailing out books all the time.
No, and it should be pretty easy to find your book. Just like search your name as author, and all of them will pop up.
Yeah.
I've done that for other authors. And speaking of, I know you've written quite a few books, and we're going to take a break right now. But after the break, I'd like to talk about some of the books that you've written, including the upcoming one, if that sounds good to you.
I'd love that.
Great. Okay, so we will be right back, everybody, with Don Cusic. Stick around for just a minute, and we'll see you soon. Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of Music is Not a Genre. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, if you'd like to learn more about the music I do with my band Rec or any other projects or anything else about me, go to nickdematteo.com. That's Nick, DEMATTEO.com. And everything is there. There's even a link to a merch store where you can get t-shirts and mugs and hats and totes and notebooks and so many other things. I'm always adding new products there. Great way to support the podcast. And finally, go to patreon.com/music is not a genre if you really like to show your support. My fans and lovely family there get exclusives and other perks and early releases, and they get to suggest topics for future podcasts as well. Thanks for listening to the mid-roll. Now back to the show. We are back with Don Cusic. Loving this conversation so far. So you've written over 30 books, and we're going to talk about your upcoming book. Now, you're tired.
I'm tired.
I've done a very small amount of writing other than for this podcast, and I have to say it is exhausting. So I admire that you've written that many books. What would you say are a couple of your favorites or ones that come to mind?
Well, you're supposed to say that, they're all like my children and I love them all equally, but you don't love all your children equally either. So the book that I think I got it right, it's almost every book. There's something wrong in there. But my Roger Miller book, the three big musical influences in my life were Hank Williams, Roger Miller, and the Beatles. And I've written books on all of them. And Roger Miller, and then I wrote a coffee table book called Nashville Sound that has the whole history of music in Nashville. A lot of pictures in it. And, it covers from the big band era all the way up to, one of the things that I point out when I speak and everything is that at the end of World War II in 1945, Nashville did not have a record label in town or a recording studio. 15 years later, it's Music City, USA. How did that happen? So I kind of go into that. Those are the two. And of course, what I've got coming up is Chet Atkins. I've written a lot of biographies. To me, I liked learning history with biographies because you have to put somebody in the context of their times. And so, I've done books on Eddie Arnold and Riders in the Sky, which is a small group, Western group. Collection Gene Autry. And of course, I've just done Chet Atkins. And Chet Atkins, you've got the whole growth of Nashville. You've got the whole thing of how it became Music City, USA. You've got not the whole thing, but, enough to tell you that this is Music Row. How did that come about? All of that is in the story of Chet Atkins.
Oh, that's incredible. I love that idea that you're learning history through the people you're writing about. You can imagine, depending on who you choose, if they span a certain, time period, especially you're talking about Nashville didn't have anything. And then 15 years later, it was Music City, that any artist who spanned that time would have experienced those changes too.
Yeah. Chet and Owen Bradley were really in the middle of it. Of moving, and of course the Nashville sound, the Nashville sound developed out of, what it was, and sound-wise was taking out the fiddles and putting in the violins, taking out steel guitar, putting in the piano. It was a little more than that. It was, had arrangements in the studio instead of arrangements from sheet music. But Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley were in the midst of all of that. They were guiding that switch to a smoother style country. A lot of people that didn't like country, well, several reasons. One was it was racist, it was unhip, it was for hicks, all of those stereotypes. And the other was it's too whiny, twangy. So we got rid of the whiny, twangy. There's about a third of the people in this country that don't like country music. And the reason is their self-image, because they're still saying, well, they must be racist, they must be hillbillies, they must be uncouth, they must be all these negative things that that you're not supposed to be. That's still hanging around. It's a lot of it is gone, especially with so many young stars being country stars. My God, Tiffany. Taylor Swift came out of country.
Yeah, and the variety of young artists are coming out. It's I will say that I grew up with kind of country music on the periphery. It wasn't a big thing, is Philadelphia area, New Jersey. My dad actually recorded a country EP in the '90s, and I've done a couple of those songs, but I've never been a huge, usually passionate about it or an aficionado. But a few weeks ago, I dedicated an entire episode to like an overview, a brief history of country music, and learned about the Nashville and how long the Opry's been around and the Bakersfield sound and things that I mean, it's just like anything when I'm putting together an episode. It's like studying for a test, and you learn everything you need to know, and then when you're done, you forget most of it. But I will say that I retained enough of it to kind of get much more of an appreciation of the variety of country music that has existed really since forever.
Well, now you missed out on the Chicago era. Chicago was the center of country music up till World War II. So
wow.
People miss that.
Yeah.
People miss that. Yeah. I remember I was working with Ken Burns on the country music series, the
Loved that
documentary.
Loved it.
And I had to say, Ken, Chicago, you've got to include Chicago. And he ended up doing that.
Yep.
But the image, the history of country now starts in Nashville. So it's very Nashville centric. When it was a lot of other stuff. I mean, my God, what about the singing cowboys? Gene Autry and Roy Rogers,
right?
Back in the 30s. They changed the look of country because, up till the image of country was hillbillies, mountaineers, that kind of thing. And nobody wanted to grow up and be a mountaineer, but everybody wanted to grow up and be a cowboy.
Yeah.
So the first positive image of country music comes from the singing cowboys. It's cool to wear a cowboy, and they're still wearing cowboy hats.
Yeah.
You put a cowboy hat on a guitar, and what does that say? It says country music.
Oh, that is so true.
Yeah. So anyway, so you got the singing cowboys. You got the 1930s with Chicago. In the 30s, country blossomed because it was on the radio. And this is R&B doesn't get on the radio until after World War II. So the influence of R&B on music in general in the 30s was just within a very small group,
right?
Because they couldn't get on the radio. Country could get on the radio. They had those barn dances. They had the National Barn Dance in Chicago. They had the Grand Ole Opry. They had a whole bunch of barn dances all over the country, and so people could hear country, and if they heard it, some of them liked it.
That makes sense. And it would influence more because it's been around in the public longer.
Yeah. Yeah. It took World War II. Of course, Louis Jordan had hits back in World War II, but really prior to World War II, you didn't have blacks on the radio. Of course, they had programs on the radio. It wasn't just playing records.
Right.
And so, that influence didn't come until after World War II when you had that expansion of radio, when you had, a lot of new stations coming on the air.
Oh, yeah. Which would make sense and you mentioned this a little bit before, and I actually did a bonus episode on Patreon about I don't know, I called it the true history of rock and roll or something like that, to kind of dispel the myth that, rock like point blank started in the mid 1950s, that to kind of go before then and say, well, what songs existed prior to that you would listen today and say, oh, that's like early rock and roll, or the term rock and roll, how long that's been around and where that came from and all of that. And it makes sense that if R&B was kind of surging in the late 40s and early 50s, that then all of a sudden you already had country and you had R&B, and that these would start to merge more to a point where when rock and roll congealed, especially publicly, people found a taste for it because those two styles were coexisting long enough for them to be ready for that kind of music,
Yeah. It had to be set up. It had to
Yeah.
be set up for it. And that didn't come until later. And of course, when you talk about it today, it's the should have been, ought to have been, but it wasn't the way it was. You tell young people. I remember I was in Memphis in the Civil Rights Museum,
Yeah.
and this girl was standing in front of this TV, young girl, and it was the police, beating the blacks and all that. She said, "I wouldn't have stood for that." And I'm sitting there thinking two things. Number one, you would have. It was just the way it was. And number two, I'm glad to hear you say that because it won't happen again.
Yeah.
Or we hope it won't happen again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has to be in a time and place. That's the thing. If we jump back to the Chet Atkins era,
Yes.
he was in the right place at the right time. He was an instrumentalist. He was a producer. He could do engineering. He was an executive. You can't have a Chet Atkins today
Hmm.
because of all that. Now, what you've got on a small scale is young people cutting a song, putting it on Spotify. They are a label.
Right.
They don't
Right.
think of themselves as that, but they are a label.
Yeah.
And they produce it, right? And then they've got to market it. And of course, Chet had RCA behind him. But, how do these young people do the marketing? Well, it costs money.
Yeah.
And the big thing about DIY is it doesn't cost money and you don't have the marketing budget.
Yeah.
Everything falls into a black hole. I mean, the numbers of stuff that goes up on the internet every day,
Oh,
songs, you know,
yeah.
if just the students here, nobody else in the country. And it just goes into a endless well there.
Yeah. There's no real way to differentiate without a team or money. I
Yeah.
as I've been looking for various people to work with, I've talked to other creators again in these forums, and there's a real reluctance to want to spend any money on anything. And I think we've gotten used to you can do it all yourself, but you're either going to have to spend a tremendous amount of time, which who has that if you need to, have a job and make money or have a family or want to enjoy life, or you need to spend a lot of or enough money to make a dent in like you said, this
Mm-hmm.
vast hole of music where everything gets dropped into. And no matter how you do it, one way or another, you're going to have to do that, whether it's with a small label, big label, or no label at all. You've got to spend some kind of money to market your music.
And that's what's coming. The transition with labels. I mean, the labels have
Mm.
the catalog. That's
Right.
that's their big strength,
Mm.
and they've got a marketing system set in. But what you've got to do, and there are companies that do that. There's a company called 30 Tigers that does that. Here, there's other companies where you go and in order to have a successful record, you got to have promotion. Well, there's a promotion company, promotion office. You need promotion on social media. You need promotion on radio. You need publicity. You need copyright, business affairs, all this stuff. And it could be just one checking account. At some point, and here's where I think I'm seeing that going to go. At some point, the person who's putting out all of these CDs, if they are successful, they're going to be 40, 50 years old and go, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And if they can find somebody to buy it, and the major labels can be able to step in and buy it, put it in their massive set of copyrights. Because, it's one thing to be a singer and a songwriter. It's another thing to be a marketing person, a promotion person, a label person, and that's what it takes to get the attention.
Yep. Yep. And it's interesting you kind of made that contrast between, Chet Atkins kind of having all those skills and what's going on today and, like individual artists and such. I heard an interview with a guy you probably know, maybe better than I do, named Jelly Roll. Have you
Oh,
heard of
yeah.
him? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Harmonica player.
Yeah. Yeah. And so he, I think was maybe courted by a label or such and such, but then rejected it. And he kind of runs his own thing now and owns his own masters and the whole thing. And there are a lot of younger artists who are kind of getting wise to that and saying, I'm going to Yeah, I have enough success that I can own my own music and have the money to market it too.
And make sure it's copyrighted so that 20, 30 years down the line and you want to sell it, you can.
Yeah.
Because unless somebody's ripping off a big hit, you're not going to hear, you know, a lot of those lawsuits and copyright problems. But
Mm,
you better get your copy. You know, the music industry is two copyrights: copyright of the recording, copyright of the song,
right, right,
and
right.
you better have those fixed up.
Yeah. Protect yourself for sure. So getting back to Chet Atkins, when is the book coming out?
June 1st.
June
That's what I've
1st.
been promised. June
Okay.
1st.
That's great. So does that mean you're done and they're just doing all the back end, or where are you in the
Yeah.
process? Yeah.
I am just sitting on the sideline. I'm doing interviews.
Oh, good, good. Yeah.
Podcast. You know,
Yeah.
the thing about when I hired a PR agency and started talking about podcasts, and they said, you know, most podcasts are about finance or business. I said, not about. They're not about music or anything. So
Wow.
yours is rare.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, less competition there.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I was on a network for a while that had about 100 music podcasts, and it was a real, it was almost like they had almost all the music podcasts you could find. Like there are more out there, and a lot of them specialize in
yeah.
we're just going to talk about Beatles, or we're just going to talk about hip hop or something like that. And I
Mhm.
don't specialize in that way, but that's good to know that. Yeah, I would have assumed there were more out there. You know.
Well, I'm sure there are. I mean, I just I've been waiting for emails. You know, somebody
Uh,
says, yeah, and I go, okay, yeah.
yeah, right, right.
So you must have pushed some button that
I don't know. Yeah. So,
that said okay.
I'm honestly not sure how some of these connections happen, but I'm glad they do anyway. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, so you've got the Chet Atkins. You mentioned that you have been in Nashville since '73. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
So
old. I'm
you
real old.
you're well, I was alive then. So I see how you know a lot about many different kinds of music, but that you've written quite a bit and on
Mhm.
country music. You live in Nashville. Why did you move to Nashville, and what got you interested in country music?
You know, I was one of those rare kids. I told you my three big music influences: Hank Williams, Roger Miller, and the Beatles.
Yeah.
I was a kid during the '60s when the Beatles were, when you got to see them new, when you got
Oh,
to hear the release as soon as it had been released.
wow.
Um, and I loved them, and I was watching the Ed Sullivan Show when they were on, and all of that sort of stuff. But I grew up on a farm, and we had a little plastic radio on the top of the refrigerator, and they had different shows. At that time it wasn't all top 40.
Mm.
You'd have a Montavani strings for an hour, and
All
then
right.
during the dinner time you'd have country music, and then at 3 o'clock you had rock and roll when the kids got out of school and
Oh,
things
okay.
like that. And I just always liked country. I can't explain it. When I was very young, 20 or so, I was in a country band. And so all of these other guys, they're in rock and roll bands. Me with three other young guys, we're in a country band, which
Right.
got us a lot of work. But, everybody was old. There weren't any
Yeah, it's all
people
right.
our age in
Yeah.
the audience.
Yeah.
But, it just, I just like, I don't know how you explain. There's a magic to music. I mean, how do you explain a star? How do you explain one guy gets hits, somebody of equal talent, it seems like equal talent doesn't get a hit. So that's
Yeah.
part of the mystery. I just always liked country.
Wow. And because where did you grow up?
Grew up in Maryland, a place called Leonardtown, Maryland, which is
Oh,
in
wow.
St. Mary's County,
Okay.
which, if you know anything about that, that's where the Potomac and Tucson come together, and they got great heart crabs.
Okay. I've probably driven not that far past there, growing up in South Jersey and visiting DC a lot. We'd go through Maryland.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah.
Nice. Wow.
Well,
Yeah,
it's about 60 miles south of Washington.
South of Washington. Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
I maybe never quite made it that far down.
yeah,
Oh, that's incredible. So and what did you play? Did you play guitar?
yeah. Well, I used if somebody from Iowa asked me that, I'd say yes. Somebody from Nashville says that, asked me that, I go, not really. Uh, because what you learn when you get here is the level of talent is so great. And people talk about, they've visited this city or that city, and then they come to Nashville and they just couldn't believe, the bar band would knock you out. I
Yeah.
remember there's a student one time, young lady, and she was in my office crying. And she said, where I grew up, nobody else played the guitar. I played the guitar.
Mm.
Nobody else wrote songs. I wrote songs. And now here, everybody writes songs.
Oh yeah.
What she didn't say was that everybody wrote songs that were better than hers. But that was a shock to her, and that shock comes to a lot of people. A lot of people get here and they go, "Oh my God, I can't compete against this."
It's not
The
easy.
audience will tell you.
The audience
Yeah,
will tell you. Yeah.
that's what students say. How do I know I'm doing right? How do I this? And kind of wanting somebody to figure it out for them. But I just so play in front, get in front of an audience and play. They'll let you know. They'll let you know pretty quick. You're in 4 bands. Audiences let you know every night.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that is an interesting point. That okay, you have the big music towns, and Nashville is certainly one of the big ones that I've been struggling with because I think that so I've lived in New York for about 25 years,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be a very easy town to get gigs in, to meet people, to meet other musicians, and all of that. And that's fine. But your competition is going to be a lot greater than most other cities.
Yeah.
And I think I developed enough before coming here that I felt like, okay, I'm ready for this. I can do this. But at the same time, there's something to be said for staying where you are and building a local following to the point where you're the local news as opposed to one of 1,000.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of people that come through the school and they go, it was fun and I loved it, but I don't want it as a business. I don't want to do it as a job.
Mm-hmm.
And I miss my family. The pull of family and home is pretty great. And you got to make a lot of sacrifices. A lot of people wouldn't mind being a star if it wasn't so much trouble. It's a lot of trouble.
It's true.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
and so people realize that along the way.
It's something you have to come to terms with.
You ask about my guitar playing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, my guitar playing. I hardly even pick one up now. But anyway, I was at a certain level, and I knew that if I worked hard, I could get to the next level. But I also knew I would never get to that top level. And so that's kind of that was a realization. If you can't, you want to do something, if you want to be the best at it or one of the best, and that wasn't in the cards for me.
It is a dedication. It is. Some of it is, I think, knowing whether or not you can, and some of it is being determined that you will, one way or another.
Oh yeah.
Having those raw skills and just stick to itiveness.
Yeah, push the talent aside, and it's the people who are persistent, who have a work ethic. They're the ones going to make it. They can be slightly less talented and still have an advantage. Not that they have to have no talent.
Right.
Some of those.
I was just having this discussion with another guy I interviewed on this show, and we kind of agree with that there needs to be a base level of talent, but beyond that, there's no telling who's going to be the one who succeeds and who doesn't, and it doesn't really, after that level, doesn't have to do with the talent. Some of it is, like you said, that mystery that why does this person succeed, and some of it is, well, that one succeeded because they made it a full-time job and they did it every day in, night out until they got to where they wanted to be.
Yeah. Well, Taylor Swift, I remember when she was starting out, she was a high school student here, and the rap on her, she can't sing, Well, she was not a great singer, still is not a great singer, but
Mm-hmm.
boy, she worked it. She taught Nashville about the social media.
Oh, whoa.
Uh, it was because here she was a 15-year-old girl. She's on well, MySpace. Remember MySpace?
I do.
She's
Yes.
putting up music on MySpace and then on Facebook, and she was connecting collecting these people, and built that base, and she still got that base. Uh, so
Wow.
that's
Right. Right.
but she's also a very brilliant writer. Could capture those 15-year-old
Yeah.
year old girls. She's managed to keep her fans, and that's hard to do. Beatles have done it, but what about New Kids on the Block?
Yeah. Good point. Right.
So, or
Yeah.
In Sync, or one of those.
Oh, yeah.
They
And
get to a
NSYNC
point.
had the tour with Backstreet Boys just so they had enough
Yeah,
fans to fill the arena. Right? Yeah.
yeah. Donny
Yeah.
Osmond. If you go back years,
Oh,
Donny Osmond, he reached a
yeah.
point when he didn't keep his audience.
That was
The
it.
Beatles did, the Rolling Stones did, but a
Yeah.
lot of those guys really didn't.
And that goes back to what you're saying about a historical perspective. There could be
Yeah.
someone right now who's nowhere near as famous as Taylor Swift, who 20 years from now will be revered and remembered, and a veteran or whatever. And people from 10 years ago, we don't know. We
Mm-hmm.
just don't know yet. Yeah.
That's a great level. Or get around young people and mention Herman's Hermits. See what they say. Who?
Yeah.
Or the Who, or somebody like that.
Oh.
Zodiacs.
Oh,
They had
wow.
one or two hits, and that was it.
That was it. Yep. Yep.
They'll know the big names. They'll know Bob Dylan and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and they'll know Johnny Cash. Amazingly enough, country act.
Yeah.
Uh, because
Huge.
he had
Yeah.
a big comeback with Rick Rubin,
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's true.
and
Wow.
he becomes cool and hip at the time.
Yeah, he always kind of had that aura, but then when he worked with Rick Rubin, geez, and we're covering Nine Inch Nails songs and things like that, it just really brought it
Yeah,
into the present day. Uh, I mean, okay, so we're getting into an area where I could talk to you for another 2 hours on pretty much all of this. Thank you so much for being with me today. It was an amazing conversation. Are there something you'd like to leave the audience with?
not really. I mean, it's been fun. I've really enjoyed today. When you do interviews, sometimes they're great and sometimes they're not so great. And this one was great.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you.
So
Same
I
here. Same
appreciate
here.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so you said it's doncusic.com, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And
And
your books are on Amazon as well.
yes.
Any other links or any other things you'd like to promote?
No, just give Chet Atkins a shot.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I look forward to
Yeah.
that.
Chet, he played a lot of jazz as well
Right.
as country. He was not just
Yeah.
a country guitar player. He's a country guy, but played a lot of jazz.
I knew him
There's
more for the
a lot of
jazz.
reasons to like him. Yeah.
Yeah, because my dad is really into jazz, and so I kind of knew him more from that than country.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for spending this time with me. It was a real pleasure.
It's a great, and have yourself a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you. And thank all of you for watching and listening. As always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. And I will talk to you next week.